On a routine morning patrol, an officer stopped a speeding vehicle that was not using emergency lights or sirens. Expecting a straightforward traffic stop, he instead encountered a nurse in a panic, rushing an unconscious patient to the hospital. As the emergency blanket shifted, revealing dark curly hair, time froze for the officer. The dying child in the passenger seat was his own son, who was supposed to be at school. In an instant, his world fell apart, and the harrowing truth about how his son ended up there was about to unfold, turning into every father's worst nightmare. Stay with us until the end to discover what happens in this gripping story you won't want to miss. Sunbeams pierced through the kitchen windows at the Reed family residence, bathing the breakfast table in warmth. Dressed in his immaculate police uniform, Malcolm Reed lingered by the counter, drinking his coffee while he observed his 10-year-old son, Jason, reluctantly pushing his scrambled eggs around his plate. Martha Reed, Malcolm's wife, navigated the kitchen gracefully, her voice filled with maternal worry as she noticed Jason's unusual quietness. "Jason, honey, you need to eat. It's going to be a long day at school," she said. Jason's response was a quiet murmur, his gaze fixed on the plate. Malcolm, noting the time and their lateness, was about to hurry Jason along when he noticed his son's drooping shoulders and averted eyes, signaling that something was amiss. "Jason," he called out, his voice softening, "are you not feeling well?" Jason shook his head, avoiding eye contact, and whispered, "I don't want to go to school." Concerned, Malcolm and Martha exchanged glances before Malcolm approached and knelt beside Jason's chair, attempting to meet his eyes. "Is it the bullies again? Are Elam and Edric still bothering you?" he asked. Jason nodded, tears starting to form, revealing his ongoing struggle. Malcolm felt a mix of anger and protectiveness surge within him. He had hoped the school's enhanced anti-bullying initiatives would curb such behavior, yet the issue persisted. "Let me look," he said gently, searching his son for signs of bullying. It was then he noticed Jason's feet under the table, the toenails blackened and peeling, a clear sign of trauma. "What happened to your feet?" he asked. Trembling, Jason explained, "Elam and Edric made me run barefoot on the pavement. They said kids with my skin don't need shoes." Malcolm's heart raced with fury at the racial taunts, but he remained composed, focusing on how best to support his son amidst this crisis. This is the compelling story we're sharing today, fraught with challenges and a deep, emotional journey. Don't miss the conclusion, as this tale of adversity and resilience unfolds. When dealing with his own child, Malcolm found it challenging to detach his professional instincts from his emotions as a father. "Jason," he began, his tone a blend of paternal and law enforcement authority, "you need to defend yourself. Remember the self-defense techniques I've shown you? Use them if they try to harm you again." Martha, who had been listening in, softly interjected, "Malcolm, he's only 10. Malcolm raised his hand to quiet her concerns. 10 is exactly when he should start learning resilience, Martha. We can't shield him forever." Jason, looking up at his father with eyes wide from both fear and uncertainty, voiced his concern. "But Dad, what if I get in trouble for fighting back?" Malcolm replied firmly, "You won't be in trouble for defending yourself, son. It's crucial that you show those bullies you aren't an easy mark. That's the only way they'll back down." Jason, still hesitant, asked timidly, "Could I maybe carry some pepper spray or a mini taser?" Malcolm's face grew stern. "No, Jason. Those could land you in serious trouble at school if they're misused. You need to stand your ground using the physical skills I taught you." Martha observed the conversation with increasing worry, her maternal instincts at odds with Malcolm's stern approach. As Jason reluctantly agreed and got ready to leave, she pleaded, "Jason, just one more bite before you go." Malcolm, however, was already leading Jason out. "Stop coddling him, Martha. He's 10. If he's hungry, he can eat at school later. We're already late." As Jason walked to the car, Martha confronted Malcolm quietly yet fervently. "Malcolm, isn't this a bit too severe? He's just a kid." Malcolm's jaw clenched. "Martha, this is how he learns. Life isn't all sunshine and rainbows. We need to prepare him for reality. But pushing him to confront? There must be another way." Malcolm's tone softened slightly, yet his determination was unwavering. Sometimes, strength is learned when one is backed into a corner or faced with adversity. "We can't guard him forever, Martha. He needs to learn to stand up for himself." With a quick kiss goodbye to Martha, Malcolm headed to the car where Jason awaited. As he settled into the driver's seat, he caught sight of the concern and conflict on his son's face. For a moment, Malcolm doubted his method, but he knew resilience was a lesson best learned early. He sternly suppressed it, convincing himself that this was essential for Jason's future resilience. He assured himself that toughening up his son was the only method to ensure he would thrive in a sometimes harsh world. As they left the driveway, the morning sunlight reflected off the shiny surface of Malcolm's police cruiser, symbolizing both protection and authority. Yet, in that moment, it cast a looming shadow over both father and son as they began what would turn out to be a pivotal day. The patrol car moved silently through the tranquil morning streets, a palpable tension filling the space between Malcolm and Jason. The boy sat turned slightly away, his eyes tracing the landscapes that whizzed by the window, while Malcolm held the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, wrestling with the emotional turmoil inside. Trained to manage crises with composed authority, Malcolm as a father felt helplessly lost for words. He yearned to offer reassurance, to close the growing distance between them, yet each attempt to speak faltered. Malcolm's thoughts raced, replaying the morning's discussions. Had his approach been too severe? Perhaps a gentler method would have been better. His training emphasized the importance of resilience and independence, particularly for a young black boy in their community. But his paternal instincts suggested Jason might need something more: understanding, comfort, or just an ear to listen. As they stopped at a red light, Malcolm seized the chance to look at his son. Jason's reflection showed a countenance marred by concern, a burden no child should carry. Malcolm's heart tightened. He almost reached out to comfort him, but as the light changed and they resumed driving, the opportunity slipped away. Approaching the school, Malcolm broke the silence with a voice harsher than intended. "Remember, son," he gruffed, "use those defense techniques if needed. Don't let them push you around." Jason's silent nod, his gaze still outward, signaled acknowledgement without conviction. They arrived at the school, and as Jason unbuckled and reached for his backpack, Malcolm felt an impulsive need to amend the morning's harshness. "Jason," he called, causing his son to halt and glance back. Malcolm rolled down the window, leaning out slightly. "Remember what I taught you. You're strong, son. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Jason's acknowledgement showed a glimmer of either determination or resignation. "Okay, Dad," he murmured before turning to enter the school. Malcolm watched his son walk away, noting the slump in his shoulders, the hesitance in his steps, signs of resignation rather than the intended confidence. For a moment, he considered confronting the principal about the bullying, but he recalled his advocacy for self-reliance and personal strength. With a heavy heart, he drove off, staying a few moments longer in the parking lot, watching as Jason disappeared into the building. Torn between the protective father and the principled officer, Malcolm eventually left, the unease in his stomach growing with each mile. Despite trying to reassure himself of the necessity of these tough lessons, doubt lingered. "You need to ensure that safety regulations are followed. I'll provide an escort to the hospital to ensure you get there quickly and safely." Malcolm's tone was firm yet sympathetic, understanding the critical nature of the situation but also his duty to uphold the law. As he escorted the hospital car, Malcolm's mind continued to whirl with the morning's events and the unexpected emergency. The drive to the hospital was quick, with the patrol car's siren clearing the way. Upon arrival, he watched as medical staff hurriedly transferred the boy from the hospital car to the emergency room. Malcolm followed them inside, a sense of responsibility driving him to see this through. He stood back as doctors and nurses swarmed around the young patient, their movements efficient yet filled with urgency. Malcolm's heart raced as he caught snippets of their conversation. Terms like internal bleeding and head trauma floated in the air, echoing the seriousness of the boy's condition. After ensuring that the boy was in capable hands, Malcolm turned to leave the hospital, his thoughts heavy with concern for both the unknown child and his own son, Jason. The weight of the day's stresses, parental worries, professional duties, and now this critical emergency, pressed down on him. The line between his roles as a father and a police officer seemed to blur more with each passing moment. As Malcolm walked back to his patrol car, he resolved to check on Jason at school later, needing to reassure himself of his son's safety. The morning's doubts lingered, questioning if his stern approach with Jason was truly what was best for his son, or if there was another way to guide and protect him. This incident at the hospital only intensified his concerns, highlighting the unpredictability and fragility of life. He drove away from the hospital, the echo of sirens fading behind him, and the haunting image of the boy with the dark curly hair stayed in his mind. Was he doing enough to protect his own son from the harsh realities of the world, while also preparing him to face them? Malcolm's day continued, marked by routine duties but overshadowed by personal reflections and a father's deep-seated fears. First and foremost, he needed to be there for his son in every possible way. As Martha clung to him, both their eyes fixed on Jason through the ICU glass, the enormity of the situation enveloped them. The horror of the day's revelations, the regret of their morning's departure, all crystallized into a sharp, painful clarity. Malcolm knew that his pursuit of toughness and self-reliance for Jason had blinded him to the vulnerabilities his son faced. He remembered his own words about strength, and they rang hollow now in the face of Jason's critical condition. The resolve to instill resilience had overshadowed the equally crucial need for empathy and support. "I promise, Martha," Malcolm whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "From now on, I'll be more than just a disciplinarian. I'll be his protector, his advocate, and his soft place to fall. We'll get through this together." Martha nodded, tears streaming down her face as she watched their son, surrounded by the hum and beep of life-supporting machines. The doctors had done their part. Now it was their turn to show Jason the full measure of their love and support. As Malcolm stood by his wife, watching over Jason, he felt the weight of his police badge both as a symbol of authority and a reminder of his responsibility, not just to uphold the law but to uphold the well-being of his family. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was determined to face them head-on, not just as Officer Reed but as Jason's father. The commitment Malcolm felt was no longer just about teaching toughness. It was about demonstrating the depth of his love and the breadth of his compassion. As they waited for any sign of improvement, Malcolm's thoughts turned to the future. Whatever it held, he was ready to confront it, ensuring that justice for Jason was pursued and that his son never felt alone in his battles again. The hospital corridor, with its sterile smell and the distant sounds of medical activity, became a crucible for Malcolm's transformation. It was here, in the shadow of his son's fight for life, that he vowed to rebalance the scales of his parental approach, merging strength with sensitivity, authority with affection. For now, the most important battle was right here, in the ICU, where a father's love would be Jason's strongest medicine. Another part of him feared the additional burden of knowing might be too much to bear right then. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Tell me now," he said firmly. "I need to know everything." The officers nodded, their expressions somber. "From what we've gathered, it appears Jason was chased by a group of students. They cornered him near the school's back entrance. One officer began, his voice low. There was a physical altercation. Jason tried to escape, but he tripped and fell down some concrete steps. Malcolm's heart clenched at the image of his son being hunted and hurt. "Do we know who these students are?" he asked, his tone edged with a growing anger. "Yes," the other officer replied. "We've identified the students involved. They're being questioned now, and we're collecting statements from witnesses. The school has promised full cooperation." Malcolm nodded, his mind racing. The knowledge that his son had been targeted so cruelly added a new layer of pain, but also a fierce determination to ensure those responsible were held accountable. "Thank you," he said to the officers. "Keep me informed. I want to be involved in every step of the process." As the officers assured him they would, Malcolm returned to the waiting room, his resolve hardened. He found Martha still on the phone, her voice a mix of hope and urgency as she spoke to potential donors. Seeing her so actively fighting for their son fortified Malcolm's own resolve to fight, not just for Jason's immediate recovery, but also to combat the bullying that had led to this tragic situation. Martha ended another call and looked up at Malcolm, her eyes searching his for any sign of hope. "Any news?" she asked. Malcolm sat down beside her, taking her hand in his. "The police are on it. They know who the kids are. It's being handled," he assured her, trying to provide some comfort despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. Martha squeezed his hand, her relief palpable even amidst the ongoing crisis. "We'll get through this, Malcolm. Together," she whispered. Malcolm nodded, the weight of the day's events bearing down on him, yet bolstered by the strength he found in Martha's unwavering support. Together, they turned their attention back to the door of the ICU, each passing second a mixture of dread and hope as they awaited further news about Jason's condition. The hospital corridor, once just a passage, had become a battleground where they fought for their son's life and for justice. As they waited, surrounded by the beeps of machines and the quiet hustle of medical staff, Malcolm knew this was just the beginning of a long journey. No matter what it took, he was ready to face it head-on, driven by a father's love and a renewed commitment to protect and nurture, rather than just to discipline. He realized he needed to be with his family at the hospital first. The gravity of the situation, the fear for his son's life, and the fight for justice were overwhelming, but he knew his presence would bring comfort to Martha and, hopefully, to Jason if he could sense his father's presence somehow. As Malcolm approached the hospital, the events of the day replayed in his mind like a relentless loop. The anger and determination to protect his son and make those responsible pay for their actions were palpable. However, as he parked his car and walked toward the hospital entrance, his steps slowed, the facade of the tough, resolute police officer giving way to the vulnerable, scared father. Entering the hospital, Malcolm found Martha by Jason's side, her eyes weary with tears but fierce with determination. She looked up as Malcolm approached, and her expression softened at the sight of him. "Any news?" she asked quietly, hope mingling with fear in her voice. Malcolm shook his head, his throat tight with emotion. "Not yet, but I've made it clear to the school and the police what needs to happen. They're looking into it, Martha, and I won't stop until we have answers and justice." Martha nodded, taking his hand and squeezing it tightly. "I know you won't. I've been calling everyone I can think of for the blood donation. We'll find a match, Malcolm." "We have to," she said, her voice cracking under the strain. Malcolm sat down beside her, their shoulders touching, drawing strength from each other's presence. They turned their gaze to Jason, lying so still and pale on the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and 4 lines. The sight was a stark reminder of the urgency of their situation. "We'll get through this, Martha. Together," Malcolm whispered, echoing her earlier words. "And when Jason wakes up, he'll see both of us here, waiting for him, ready to take him home." Martha leaned her head on Malcolm's shoulder, her body trembling slightly as she fought back tears. "He has to wake up, Malcolm. He just has to," she murmured. The two sat in silence, watching over their son, their hearts heavy with worry yet filled with an unyielding resolve. The hours stretched on, the hospital's beeping machines forming a background symphony to their vigil. Eventually, Dr. Flores returned with a hopeful expression. "We found a donor match," she announced, her eyes conveying the relief she felt. "The transfusion will happen tonight. It's a good match, and we're hopeful it will help stabilize Jason." Relief washed over Malcolm and Martha, their hands clasping tighter. "Thank you, Doctor," Malcolm said, his voice hoarse with gratitude. "Thank you for everything." As Dr. Flores left to prepare for the transfusion, Malcolm and Martha remained by Jason's side, their spirits lifted slightly by the news. The fight was far from over, but for now there was hope. Hope for Jason's recovery and for a future where they could protect him better, love him harder, and never let him face such horrors alone again. The weight of the day's decisions, the confrontations, and the relentless pursuit of justice remained with Malcolm, but he knew that his primary role now was as a father who would fight tirelessly, not just against those who had harmed his son, but also for the safety and well-being of Jason in the days, weeks, and years to come. He would do it in a way that honored his role as both a father and an officer of the law. The temptation to let his emotions dictate his actions had been strong, but the encounter with the young girl had served as a powerful reminder of the responsibilities he bore, not only to his own family but to the community as a whole. As Malcolm drove towards the police station, his thoughts shifted to the broader implications of his actions and how they might affect his son's view of justice and authority. He knew that handling this situation with integrity would set an example for Jason on how to face adversity with dignity and strength. Upon arriving at the station, Malcolm immediately went to the detective's office, where they began reviewing the CCTV footage. The video confirmed the presence of Elam and Edric at the scene and captured their interactions with Jason before the altercation. With this evidence, Malcolm felt a renewed confidence in the legal process. He knew that with patience and diligence, the truth would come to light, and those responsible would be held accountable. Working alongside the detectives, Malcolm helped to piece together the sequence of events that led to Jason's injuries. The footage was forwarded to the proper channels, and additional witness statements were gathered. The school's previous reports on bullying incidents involving Elam and Edric were also reviewed, highlighting a pattern of behavior that had been inadequately addressed. Throughout the investigation, Malcolm kept a steady communication line open with Martha, updating her on each development. Together, they prepared for the possibility of a long legal process, committed to seeing it through for the sake of their son and for the safety of other children who might be facing similar threats. Days turned into weeks, and as Jason slowly began to show signs of improvement, Malcolm's resolve only strengthened. He attended meetings with school officials and community leaders, advocating for more robust anti-bullying programs and clearer protocols for handling such incidents. He knew that real change was necessary to prevent another family from enduring the pain they had faced. Through it all, Malcolm never forgot the image of the young girl who had reminded him of the true essence of his duty. Her simple thank you had steered him back to his fundamental purpose as a protector and a beacon of justice. This experience reshaped his approach to both his career and his role as a parent, emphasizing empathy, patience, and the importance of upholding principles in every action. As Jason continued to recover, Malcolm was there every step of the way, supporting his son's healing not just physically but emotionally as well. He made a conscious effort to listen more attentively and to reassure Jason that he was safe, loved, and valued beyond measure. The ordeal had tested him in ways he had never anticipated, but it had also reaffirmed his commitment to his family, his community, and his own ideals. Malcolm knew that the road ahead might still hold challenges, but he faced them with a clear conscience, guided by a renewed sense of purpose and the unwavering support of his family. As he looked forward to the future, Malcolm was certain of one thing. He would continue to fight for justice, but always with integrity and a heart full of love for his son. "How quickly can we find a donor? What do we need to do?" Dr. Flores looked at them both, her face reflecting the urgency of the situation. "We've already placed Jason on the transplant list, but given the immediate need, it would be best to find a living donor. Family members are usually the first we consider for compatibility." Malcolm's mind raced. "I'll get tested," he said quickly, "and anyone else in our family who can. We'll find a match." Martha nodded, tears brimming in her eyes, but her voice steady with resolve. "I'll call our relatives now. We'll start organizing tests today." Dr. Flores gave them a small, encouraging nod. "I'll arrange for the testing to be expedited. The sooner we find a compatible donor, the better. In the meantime, we'll do everything to keep Jason stable." With plans set into motion, Malcolm felt a renewed sense of purpose surge through him. The fear and helplessness that had gripped him momentarily were now channeled into action. He turned to Martha, his partner in every sense, and together they started the process of reaching out to family and organizing the necessary medical tests. The hours that followed were a blur of phone calls, hospital visits, and meetings with medical staff. Malcolm's family responded quickly, coming together in a united front to support Jason. One by one they were tested, all holding on to hope that one of them would be a match. During this intense time, Malcolm's thoughts often drifted back to the footage he had left behind at the station. The weight of what Jason had endured at school, the ongoing investigation, and the legal battles that lay ahead were never far from his mind. However, he knew that his immediate priority was his son's survival and recovery. As they waited for the test results, Malcolm and Martha stayed by Jason's side, talking to him, reading his favorite stories, and playing his favorite music softly in the background, hoping that even in his unconscious state he could feel their love and presence. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Dr. Flores entered the room with a folder in her hands. Her expression was cautious but hopeful. "We have good news," she announced, looking directly at Malcolm and Martha. "We have a compatible donor within the family." Relief washed over both of them, so profound that Malcolm felt his knees might buckle under the weight of it. He reached out to steady himself against the wall again, this time out of relief rather than despair. "Who is it?" Martha asked, her voice trembling. "It's Malcolm," Dr. Flores revealed. "You are a perfect match." Without hesitation, Malcolm responded, "Let's do it. Whatever it takes." The days that followed were filled with preparations for the surgery. Malcolm underwent several preoperative procedures and tests while continuing to support Martha and staying involved in Jason's daily care. The community around them rallied, offering support in countless ways, from meals to prayers. The surgery day arrived, and Malcolm felt a mix of nerves and determination. He and Jason were both prepped for the procedure, and as he lay on the gurney beside his son, he reached over to squeeze his hand. "We're in this together, buddy. We're going to get through this." The transplant was a success. The recovery process was slow and required patience, but day by day, Jason showed signs of improvement. Malcolm's liver regenerated as expected, and his resolve to protect and advocate for his son only grew stronger. Through this ordeal, Malcolm had not only saved his son's life, but had also been given a stark reminder of the preciousness of family and the strength of community. As he watched Jason slowly regain strength, Malcolm knew that his fight for justice at the school and within the community would continue with renewed vigor. He was determined to ensure that no other child would have to endure what Jason did. Their journey had been harrowing, but it had brought the family closer than ever. Malcolm knew that the road ahead might still offer challenges, but with his family by his side, he was ready to face them, fortified by love and a profound sense of duty. In her street clothes, her expression a mixture of concern and fatigue. "No, I'm sorry," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "There's been no match found yet. I came off my shift and thought I'd stop by to see how he was doing, and if you needed anything." Malcolm's heart sank further. The brief flare of hope extinguished as quickly as it had ignited. He nodded, trying to mask his disappointment and maintain composure in front of Martha and the nurse. "Thank you, Nancy," he managed to say, his voice strained. "We appreciate you coming by." Nancy gave them a sympathetic look. "I'll keep Jason in my prayers. Everyone at the hospital is talking about finding him a donor. We're all rooting for him," she reassured them before excusing herself to give them some privacy. Left alone once more, Malcolm felt the weight of their predicament press down on him with renewed force. He watched as Martha sat back down, her shoulders slumped, the fight seemingly drained out of her for the moment. He knew he needed to be strong for both of them, but found himself grappling with his own whirlwind of emotions. The silence between them stretched on, each lost in their own thoughts, until Malcolm finally broke it. "We're not giving up," he said, his voice firm despite the exhaustion evident in his eyes. "I'll contact more people, expand the search beyond our immediate circle. There must be someone out there compatible and willing to help." Martha looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen from crying but filled with a fierce determination that mirrored his own. "Let's do it," she said. "Let's use every resource we have. Social media, community groups, anything. Someone out there has to be able to help Jason." Galvanized by Martha's resolve, Malcolm set to work right there in the hospital. He pulled out his phone, drafting posts for social media and contacting community leaders and local media to spread the word further. Each call, each message sent, felt like a small step toward hope, a chance to pierce the darkness surrounding them with a potential lifeline for Jason. As the hours turned into days, the community's response was overwhelming. People from all walks of life shared their messages, offered to get tested, and sent words of support. Local news outlets picked up the story, broadcasting Jason's need for a liver donor across the city and beyond. Finally, the relentless effort bore fruit. A call came from the hospital with news that a potential donor had been found, a match who had seen the story on the news and come forward to be tested. Relief washed over Malcolm and Martha like a wave, their gratitude immense and their spirits lifted with renewed hope. As preparations for the transplant began, Malcolm stayed by Jason's side, talking to him about the outpouring of support from the community, promising him that they would get through this together. "You see, buddy," Malcolm whispered one evening as he held Jason's hand, "you're not fighting alone. We're all with you." The successful transplant marked a new beginning for Jason and a profound turning point for Malcolm. Through this harrowing ordeal, he had witnessed the power of community, the strength of collective action, and the unyielding spirit of hope. These experiences reshaped his understanding of service and protection, reinforcing his commitment to not only fight for justice, but also to foster compassion and solidarity within his community. Malcolm knew that the journey ahead would still hold challenges, but he faced them with a heart fortified by love and a spirit guided by a deeper sense of purpose. "Now I am. Let's find out what happened, once and for all." Gathering their resolve, Malcolm and Martha left the hospital and drove to the school. The corridors and playground that were once filled with the joyful noise of children at play now echoed with a haunting silence. As they walked through the school gates, each step felt heavy, laden with a mix of dread and determination. Upon reaching the playground, the scene of the incident, Malcolm felt a chill run down his spine. The area was deserted now, but he could almost see the events as they had unfolded, playing out before his eyes like a silent movie. Martha walked slowly around the playground, her eyes scanning every corner, every piece of equipment. "This is where they cornered him," she said softly, pointing to a secluded part of the playground near some shrubs. The ground there was scuffed, signs of a struggle evident even without the details. Malcolm crouched down, running his fingers over the cold, hard earth. "They didn't give him a chance," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. The reality of his son being bullied and harmed on these very grounds made his heart ache with anger and sorrow. They continued to inspect the area, gathering their own observations, when Malcolm's phone rang. It was Dr. Flores. With a trembling hand, he answered. "Dr. Flores?" "Mr. Reed, I have good news." Dr. Flores's voice came through, filled with relief. "The transplant was successful. Nancy and Jason are both stable. Jason's body is responding well to the new liver. It's still a long road to recovery, but the worst is behind us." Overwhelmed with relief, Malcolm's knees buckled, and he supported himself against a nearby swing set. "Thank you, doctor, thank you," he managed to say, his voice breaking with emotion. Martha rushed over, tears of joy streaming down her face, and embraced him tightly. They took a moment to absorb the news, the weight of their fears momentarily lifted by the hopeful outcome. "Let's go back to the hospital," Martha suggested, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We need to be there when he wakes up. He needs to see us." Nodding in agreement, Malcolm took one last look at the playground, a place that had brought such pain to his son, but also a place where they had started to find the answers they needed to fight back and ensure this never happened to another child. As they drove back to the hospital, Malcolm's thoughts were with Nancy, the woman who had risked everything to save Jason. Her bravery and selflessness had given their son a second chance at life. He knew he would be forever grateful to her, and her act of kindness would remain with him, inspiring him to continue fighting for justice and safety in their community. Back at the hospital, as they walked through the corridors towards Jason's room, the reality of their situation began to settle in. They were not just victims of a cruel act. They were part of a community that had shown incredible support in their time of need. They had seen the worst of humanity in Jason's bullies, but also the best in people like Nancy. Reaching Jason's room, they found him still asleep, the gentle rise and fall of his chest a comforting sight. They settled in by his side, ready to be there for him when he awoke. In the quiet of the room, Malcolm took Martha's hand, squeezing it gently. "We've been through the worst," he whispered. "Now we focus on healing, on making things right. For Jason, for all the kids who need someone to stand up for them." Martha nodded, squeezing back, her eyes meeting his with a resolve that matched his own. They were united, stronger together, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with love, courage, and a newfound hope. By then it was too late. Jason had already slipped from the bench and fallen awkwardly. By the time I reached him, the other boys had scattered. He was alone, unconscious. Malcolm clenched his fists, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Did anyone else see this happen? Were there other witnesses?" he asked, his voice strained with frustration. Mr. Dowse shook his head regretfully. "I didn't see anyone else around. It was just before the end of recess, and most students were heading back to their classes. The area was unusually quiet." Miss Catherine interjected. "That area of the playground isn't well monitored. It's one of the older parts and not directly visible from the main school buildings. We've had issues there before. It's why I've been pressing for more supervision." Martha, who had been listening intently, her face etched with concern, finally spoke. "This can't go on," she said firmly. "No child should feel unsafe at school. We need more than just better supervision. We need accountability from the administration." Malcolm nodded in agreement. "We will hold them accountable," he said, turning back to face Mr. Dowse and Miss Catherine. "This isn't just an unfortunate accident. It's a result of negligence and a lack of proper response to bullying. We're going to need your full cooperation moving forward." Both educators nodded, their expressions solemn. "Of course, Officer Reed. Whatever you need," Mr. Dowse responded. Miss Catherine added, "I'll gather all the reports I've filed about Elam and Edric. I've documented every incident. It's all there." "Thank you," Malcolm said, his tone slightly softened by their cooperation but still resolute. "We need to make sure this doesn't happen to any other child." As they wrapped up their discussion at the playground, Malcolm and Martha made their way back to their car, their minds heavy but their purpose clear. They drove back to the hospital in silence, each lost in their own thoughts but united in their determination to seek justice for Jason and to push for changes that would protect other children in the future. Arriving back at the hospital, they found Nancy resting in a recovery room. Malcolm approached her bed and gently took her hand, whispering, "Thank you, Nancy. You've done more for us than we can ever repay." Nancy managed a weak smile. "Just take care of that boy," she murmured. Malcolm nodded. "We will. And we'll make sure what happened to him never happens to another child." With renewed determination, Malcolm and Martha returned to Jason's side, waiting for him to wake from surgery. They knew the road ahead would be challenging, but they were ready to face it together, fortified by the community's support and driven by a newfound resolve to advocate for safety and justice in their son's school and beyond. Now, with solid evidence and testimonies from Mr. Doe and Miss Catherine, Malcolm felt empowered to take decisive action. The sense of resolve that had been building was now at its peak. As they drove back to the hospital, the weight of the previous hours began to lift slightly, knowing that they were moving towards justice for Jason. Martha, equally determined but visibly relieved by the news of the successful surgery, turned to Malcolm. "Once this is all over, we need to make sure that no other child at that school, or any school, has to endure what Jason did. What we've started today doesn't end with us." Malcolm nodded in agreement. "Absolutely," he replied. "This is just the beginning. We'll push for changes in school policies on bullying, and I won't stop until we see real action. It's not just about punishing those responsible. It's about preventing this from happening again." Their conversation continued along these lines until they arrived at the hospital. As they walked briskly through the hospital corridors, the sense of urgency was palpable, but so was a sense of purpose. They were met with smiles and nods from hospital staff, who had been following Jason's case and were rooting for his recovery. Entering Jason's room, they found him slowly waking from the anesthesia. His eyes fluttered open, and upon seeing his parents, a weak smile crossed his face. "Mom, Dad," he whispered hoarsely. Martha rushed to his side, taking his hand gently. "We're here, honey. Everything's going to be okay now." Malcolm stood by the bed, his emotions swirling, a mix of relief, love, and lingering anger at what had brought them to this point. "You're going to be just fine, son. You're strong, and you've got a lot of people who care about you." As they spent time with Jason, discussing light topics to keep his spirits up, Malcolm's phone buzzed with a message from Bradley, updating him that the CCTV footage clearly showed the bullying incident. It was another piece of evidence that would strengthen their case. The next few weeks were a blur of hospital visits, meetings with school officials, and consultations with lawyers. Malcolm and Martha were relentless, appearing in several community forums and interviews to discuss bullying and its consequences. The local media covered Jason's story extensively, sparking widespread public support and prompting the school to initiate several anti-bullying measures, including training for staff and new surveillance systems on campus. Eventually, the school district agreed to a significant settlement that included not only a financial compensation for Jason's medical expenses and trauma, but also a commitment to overhaul its policies on bullying. Elam and Edric were suspended and underwent mandatory counseling, and the principal retired amidst the scandal. As Jason recovered and returned to a somewhat normal life, the Reeds found themselves at the forefront of a community movement against bullying. They established a foundation in Jason's name to support bullied children and to fund programs that teach empathy and conflict resolution in schools. Looking back on those tumultuous days, Malcolm knew that while they had won a significant battle, the war against bullying required constant vigilance. But with Jason recovering by their side, and with a community united behind them, Malcolm and Martha felt ready to face any challenge that might come their way, determined to ensure a safer environment for all children. For now, they could breathe a momentary sigh of relief, knowing that Jason was safe and on the path to recovery. As they waited for him to wake, Malcolm knew the road ahead would be challenging, but with Jason's health secured, they could face anything together. Standing in the quiet of the ICU hallway, Malcolm's thoughts turned towards the future. He considered the need for systemic changes at the school, the ongoing legal proceedings they would initiate against those responsible, and how to best support other families who might be suffering in silence. He was more determined than ever to turn their ordeal into a catalyst for change, ensuring that schools would become safer places for all children. Martha, ever the pillar of strength, agreed. When Jason wakes up, we tell him not just about the surgery, but about how his situation is going to help make things better for others. We make sure he knows that his struggle wasn't in vain. Malcolm nodded, filled with a renewed sense of purpose. And we thank Nancy, he added solemnly. Her bravery changed the course of this nightmare. We owe her a debt we can never fully repay, but we can start by making sure her act of kindness is known and celebrated. Together, they decided to establish a community fund in Nancy's name to assist other families facing medical crises, ensuring her selflessness would continue to impact lives long into the future. As the ICU door opened and a nurse signaled that they could see Jason, Malcolm and Martha took a deep breath, ready to face their son with courage and hope. They entered the room quietly, taking in the sight of Jason, still unconscious but stable. They took positions by his side, each taking one of his hands, whispering words of love and encouragement. Over the next few days, as Jason gradually awakened and their family began the slow process of healing, Malcolm and Martha were active voices in the community, speaking at school board meetings and collaborating with local leaders to address the bullying issue comprehensively. Their efforts, coupled with the media coverage that followed Jason's story, sparked significant changes. The school implemented a new anti-bullying policy, which included mandatory workshops for students and teachers, and established a clear, rigorous process for reporting and addressing bullying incidents. As Jason's recovery continued, the Reeds felt a shift not just in their own lives, but in the community. What had begun as a personal tragedy was transforming into a powerful narrative of change and hope, influencing policies and attitudes towards bullying nationwide. Malcolm, reflecting on the tumultuous journey, felt a mix of emotions. There was pain and regret for what Jason endured, but also pride in how they had turned adversity into advocacy. He knew the fight for justice and safety would continue, but he was grateful for the progress they'd ignited and hopeful for the future they were building. In quiet moments by Jason's hospital bed, Malcolm and Martha planned their next steps, committed to using their experience to advocate for children everywhere, ensuring safer educational environments. They knew the road would be long, but they were ready to face it, strengthened by their love for their son and their commitment to justice. Malcolm's commitment was now deeply ingrained, and his sense of duty extended beyond just his family to the wider community that had rallied around them during their time of need. The bond between them had been fortified by adversity and compassion, a testament to the resilience and enduring strength of human connections. As Malcolm and Martha settled back into the routine at Jason's bedside, they continued their advocacy for anti-bullying policies, partnering with local schools, community centers, and law enforcement agencies to educate and train on the signs of bullying and effective intervention strategies. They became active voices in forums and workshops, sharing their story to help others understand the profound impact of bullying on children and families. The legal proceedings against Elam, Edric, and their families progressed, with Malcolm and Martha pushing for comprehensive measures that would not only punish but also rehabilitate and educate to prevent future incidents. Their efforts were instrumental in implementing new standards for handling bullying incidents across the school district, which included mandatory reporting, dedicated counselors, and regular follow-ups with affected students and families. Jason's recovery was slow but steady. With each passing day, he regained more of his strength and spirit, bolstered by the love and unwavering support of his family. His resilience became a beacon of hope for everyone who had followed his journey, a living testament to the power of courage and the importance of standing up against injustice. One evening, as the hospital room bathed in the gentle glow of the setting sun, Malcolm and Martha sat with Jason, talking softly about the future. They discussed plans for more family outings, support groups for bullying victims, and even a book detailing their experiences and the lessons they'd learned about love, resilience, and advocacy. "I want to help other kids like me," Jason said quietly, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I want them to know they're not alone." Martha smiled, squeezing his hand. "And you will, sweetheart. We'll do it together." Malcolm looked at his family, his heart full. Despite the scars of the ordeal, they had found a new purpose. "We've turned a painful chapter into a force for good. It's our legacy, Jason. And it's just beginning." As night fell and the hospital quieted, Malcolm stepped out into the cool air, taking a moment to reflect. The road ahead was indeed daunting, but they were equipped to face it, fueled by their experiences and driven by a commitment to make a difference. The community they had built, the connections forged in the fire of their ordeal, was a source of strength and inspiration. With a renewed sense of purpose, Malcolm walked back inside, ready to continue the work that lay ahead. Together, with Martha and Jason by his side, they would forge a path toward healing and justice, not just for themselves but for every family, every child, who had faced the darkness of bullying. They were ready to lead by example, to teach and to learn, to protect and to heal. The journey was far from over, but they were ready to face it, together.